Paul. And Paul, if you would please take it away, sir.
All right, thanks, Jason, and appreciate the friendly intro. And Scott, good to see you as well, and everybody else. Really excited to be with you all this morning and talking about a topic that at least I find really interesting. And some people might you might dare say it's kind of fun when you get to pricing, if you have the right perspective on it. And so today we're going to share with you some tools and content that we've developed at Pragmatic Institute and elsewhere that hopefully will help you out with some of the challenges, because pricing is a pretty multivariate topic. There's a lot going on there, but I'm excited to share with you, and hopefully we'll have some fun along the way. So Jason, I'm going to share my desktop. Can y'all see my kids? It's probably not what you came for, but they are cute. We took that picture at Sequoia National Forest about a year ago, and highly recommend it if you ever get the chance.
That's definitely not Austin.
No, that is not Austin at all. Okay, value-based pricing. So before we get into the stuff that I wanted to share with y'all today, I wanted to do a little icebreaker, and we'll use the Zoom chat for this one, just because of the amount of us. What is if you could wave a magic wand and say, I wish that I could solve this one challenge in pricing that I'm facing today, what would that be? So type that into the Zoom chat and say, I wish I could solve whatever challenge on pricing. And we'll see what pops up there and see if we're going to address some of those today. And I'll read some of these out as they flow by. Don't want to leave money on the table? Yeah, for sure. That's frustrating. I want a method behind pricing, a little bit of a structure, maybe to make some of those decisions. A way to raise prices for differentiated offerings. Okay. Convince sales to sell on value. That is a big deal. We'll talk about that a little bit. What's the right price for a new solution? Appropriate pricing levels. Find ways to add more value. Value pricing, big topic we're going to get into today. What does that even mean? What does it even mean to do value-based pricing? How can you understand the competitive effectiveness or weakness of of a particular pricing strategy? Okay. How do you go in against high and low end competitors? All right. We're going to cover a lot of this stuff today. This is really interesting. Thank you everybody for sharing. I don't want to say we're going to solve every single challenge, because there is no magic wand, unfortunately, but some of the stuff we're going to talk to today, I think is going to help you, at least put you in the right frame of mind. And when we get towards the end, I'll point you to some additional content as well. If you want to read more on this topic, if you're the type of person who reads, we also have, some podcasts and webinars and other things that, you could check out if this is something you're really interested in. Oh, and a big shout out to Sarah Mitchell from Pragmatic Institute as well. So, hey, Sarah, good to see you again. All right. So pricing is a really powerful topic. It's also really risky if we get it wrong. And there's a lot of examples of pricing mistakes out there, but my favorite example of a pricing mistake, if you could call it that, is Netflix. Most people don't know that Netflix actually started because of a pricing mistake at one of their competitors. And so you picture, late 90s, early 2000s, Reed Hastings and his wife, they rented a movie from Blockbuster Video. And they brought it back. It was a day or two late. And Blockbuster hit them with a $40 late fee. And they argued back and forth, and they wouldn't refund it. And so Reed Hastings walked out of that, and he said, this is ridiculous. There's got to be a better way. And that was sort of the genesis of Netflix. So it's pretty interesting to think that Netflix probably would have never existed, at least in the way we think about it today, if not for Blockbuster screwing up their pricing and hitting them with that big late fee. Pretty scary if you think about it. So you'd think Netflix would be like really attuned to pricing mistakes. But round about 2011, do y'all remember this? Netflix was making this transition from DVD by mail to streaming. And they actually were trying to incent people to move over to streaming. And they raised their prices significantly. They raised their price from $10 a month to $16 a month if you wanted to get both DVD by mail and streaming. And their subscribers revolted. They lost about 800,000 subscribers, which was pretty significant for them at the time, in the space of about 4 months. Pretty risky, right? So if you get pricing wrong, you can screw a lot of things up. And other companies see this as well. Have y'all ever heard of this guy named Ron Johnson? So if you're not familiar with Ron Johnson, he was sort of one of the big brains at Apple behind the Apple Store. He and Steve Jobs were the one that really sort of came together and built the Apple Store, the first model of it. And it's been incredibly successful. Most people don't know this, but the Apple Store has higher per square foot sales than anyone in the world. They've got higher per square foot sales than Tiffany's at the Apple Store. Pretty amazing how efficient they are with their space. But Ron Johnson in 2012 was recruited out of Apple as the CEO of this little company that y'all may have heard of called JCPenney. And at the time they were kind of struggling. And JCPenney had always had this pricing model that was one of discounts, right? You've got your coupon code, your whatever, and you would get a discount applied to the register. And their customers really loved this feeling of, I'm going there, I'm going to get a deal. And Ron Johnson came in and said, no, we're done with that. What we're going to do is we're going to apply the discount up front. We're going to have everyday low pricing. You don't have to worry about finding a coupon anymore. And their customers revolted against that. In just a couple of months, their stock price fell from over 40 to under 10, mainly as a result of that pricing shift. Their market, it didn't resonate with their market. And so they had to roll that back. Eventually, Ron Johnson was let go. The new CEO came in and put things back the way they were. But the big point here is that pricing is really risky if you get it wrong, right? But it's also really powerful. One of the things I want to get into today with value-based pricing is how pricing is the most powerful and certainly the quickest lever that you can pull on to make your product successful. You think about, the traditional 4 P's of marketing, product, price, promotion, place. If you make a product change, if you change your features or whatever, that could take months or quarters. If you make a promotional change in marketing, that could take also weeks, 2 months. But if you make a pricing change, you can pull that lever immediately and see results really quick. And so pricing, if you know how to do it and strip the risk out of it, can actually be a really powerful lever to affect your profitability. And that's what we're going to get into today. Does that sound like a decent session? All right, cool. So y'all know who Pragmatic Institute is. I'm not going to belabor this. This is some content that we've lifted out of our class we call Price. But if you want to learn more about us, go to the Pragmatic Institute website. We got all sorts of resources for you there. I won't spend a whole lot more time on that. My background before I joined Pragmatic as an instructor, like Jason mentioned in his really nice intro, I was a product management and marketing executive. I worked at some really large companies like Cisco and Dell. I also worked at a bunch of startups here in Austin, Texas, where I live, along with Scott and some others. And so as we go throughout today, I'm going to share with y'all some examples of where I've used some of this stuff and where it worked, and also maybe where I struggled. Hopefully that'll lead you down a better path than I ever went down. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever been to a Pragmatic session. We use a framing device when we lead teams through learning about product topics, which is this thing we call the Pragmatic Framework. And there's a lot going on here. I'm not going to teach this to you, but just realize that this framework we use as a device to help teams understand, what are all the activities they have to think about if you're in the product world. Some of those things are strategic and some are more tactical, but you got to think about all of it, to make your job work. And if you look at where pricing is, it's kind of right there in the middle. It ranges both strategic and tactical. And so what we're going to do in this session is look at how pricing can face sort of both sides of our framework. On one hand, it can be highly strategic, and that's some of the things we're going to talk about today about pricing strategies and segmentation and so on. But on the other side, it can be very tactical when you think about working with sales and helping to win the deal and so on. There's some very sort of, boots on the ground type of tactics that you have to hit with pricing as well. All right, so I want to start off with a very quick illustration of how powerful pricing can be. So let's say that you are focused on this first column here on the left-hand side. Let's say that your all-in revenue for your product was $100 million. All right, so your top line revenue, 100 million. All of your costs put together are 90 million. That obviously leaves you with a profit of 10 million. Now, if you were able to improve your pricing by 1% price improvement, That will obviously move your revenue from 100 to 101 million. But changing your price didn't affect your cost. And so your costs are still at 90, but look at what it did to your profit. You moved from 10 to 11 million. So what I find really interesting about pricing is, in this example, a 1% improvement to price resulted in a 10% improvement to profit. So it's pretty powerful. That's why I say pricing, while it's risky, there's a ton of power behind it if we get it right. And so in today's section, we're going to talk about how to find some of those 1% improvements to your pricing by using tools like value-based pricing to really get there. And the first thing I want to do is a little exercise that we're going to do together. Let's consider a product like this. This is one of those, Garmin dashboard cameras that you would stick up on your dash and you would use to record as you drive around. So if you were the product manager for this, what would you want to know in order to effectively price this product? And we're going to use this fun little tool called Menti in order to gather a poll of everybody. And so I'm going to drag my my web browser over here to the side, and it's going to build us a dynamic word cloud as we go. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to hopefully paste the link down here in the text chat for you to just click. There it is. So you can just click that link, or you can go to menti.com and put in that code at the header, and it's going to build out our little word cloud. What are the things you would want to know if you were pricing that little dashboard camera? All right, what's the cost to build it? What else? What's the competition look like, for sure? What's the value that the customers have on it? Who's using it? The persona? Who's buying it? Why are they buying it? Yeah, that'd be a good thing to know. Jay says in the chat, what are the features that it has? What's the demand? What's their willingness to pay, WTP? I love that concept. What's the market need? How much time are we going to save for the user? Or maybe I want to know, like, what's the average insurance claim? What's the deductible that somebody's going to have to pay if they get in a wreck and they don't have this? That might speak to their value. Okay, what's the use case? Okay. So we've got a really good starting point here. We've got a lot of things that we would want to know here. Wallet share, technology, costs, and so on. I would agree with every single thing that you guys came up with on this list, with the exception of one of them, and that is your cost. And the reason why we say that is that when it comes to pricing your product, your cost is irrelevant. And a lot of people, would hear that and they're like, ooh, that doesn't feel right. No, of course I want to know my cost when I'm setting my price. I don't want to lose money. And that may be true, but when it comes to setting the price to the outside world, your cost has zero bearing on that. And we're going to talk about why that is and what it looks like. But for now, I'm just going to let you kind of stew on that and just be uncomfortable in the idea that cost doesn't matter to pricing. And we're going to come back to that. I'm just going to sort of leave you in the discomfort for a few minutes. Because one of the things we're going to get into today is that pricing captures value. So you think about all the wonderful things that you build in your product, all the features you do, all the personas you're addressing, all the agile transformation that a team like Scott would take you through. That's all about the creation of value. Pricing is what captures that value. And so when you think about what we're going to do today with value-based pricing, it's really about the capture of value. You have to create it first, then you can go capture it. So in order to capture pricing, there are 3 basic strategies for pricing that you can use, 2 of which are not so good and 1 of which is great. And those 3 basic strategy for pricing, if you elevate pricing to its highest level, you can do one of these 3 things: cost plus, competition focused, or value-based pricing. Cost plus pricing is the one on the left. That's the most simple. So cost plus pricing is where I look at the product and I say, my Garmin dashboard camera cost me $100 to create. And I want $50 of margin on top of that $100 of cost. Therefore, my price to the market is $150. All right, your cost plus your desired margin equals your price. Cost plus pricing is almost always wrong. And the reason it's almost always wrong is that when you set your outward facing price based on your inward facing cost, that has nothing to do with what the market was actually willing to pay for that product. And so The only thing cost plus pricing is really good at is making sure you don't lose money on an individual deal, but it's actually really bad at optimizing profit. Because if you set your cost plus price at 150, what if the market was actually willing to pay 200? You're now losing $50 per unit. Not super smart, right? And so with just a few minor exceptions, cost plus is probably not the way to go. The second worst way is competition focused. That's where you look at the competition and say, well, Damon's charging $100 for his product, therefore I'm going to charge $100 for my product. There's a couple issues here. The first issue is that you're basically outsourcing your pricing strategy to your competitor when you do that. The second issue is that you're assuming that they've done pricing research. And I can tell you that is not an accurate assumption in almost every case. They usually have not. And third, you're essentially stripping away any differentiation you have in your product. Because if you charge the same price as your competition, you're basically communicating to the market that, hey, our product is equivalent. But I'm guessing for most of you, it's not. If I were to go to you individually, if I were to say, April, is your product better than the competition? I'm guessing most of you would say, yeah, it's better. And I've got all these reasons why. Well, if your product is truly better, then you should be able to charge more for it. If we're charging the same as the competition, but on the other hand, we're saying our product is better, it's like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. So if we've created more value, we should be able to capture more value. That's the idea. So the way that we're going to do it is called value-based pricing. Value-based pricing is where we price the product based not on the cost of the competition, but on what they're willing to pay. Now, that's one of those things that is really easy for me to sit up here and talk about, but it's actually kind of tricky to figure out what they're willing to pay because you can't ask people directly what they're willing to pay. I mean, you can, but you just get bad data. So like, for example, if I go to somebody directly and I show them my product, like I use this product as an example when I teach. I bought this little thing. It's called an AeroFit from a company in Europe about a couple months ago. And it's kind of fun. It's got a little valve on both sides that control the air pressure required to breathe in and out. And it connects to your phone via Bluetooth app. And it actually is a lung trainer that will run your lungs through a series of exercises to make them stronger. I like it because I do weightlifting, but if you're interested in athletic performance or whatever, you might like it. But if you're the product manager for this and you go out and ask people directly, what are they willing to pay? What kind of answers do you think I'm going to generate if I ask that question directly?
They're going to say, $2.
That's right, Denise. They tend to be really lowball answers or not realistic. People will say things like, "Oh, I wouldn't pay anything for that," or "I'd pay $1 for that." People know that you're doing pricing research, and so they tend to game the system by giving you lowball answers if asked directly. So when we're trying to determine value-based pricing, one of the things we're going to learn is that you can't go through what I call the front door when asking that question. You have to kind of go through the side door or the back door. And you have to figure out what they're willing to pay without asking them directly, what are they willing to pay? All right, but the idea here is we should price based on the value that we're delivering. And yes, Anthony, it's called an AeroFit. Hold it up so you can see it. AeroFit. I bought it from a company in Europe. Pretty interesting little product. All right, so let's look at some examples of value-based pricing. And some of these are not going to feel like value-based right away, but when you think about them, they actually are. Start with something simple, gasoline. So gasoline is actually value-based pricing. It looks like cost plus and it feels like cost plus because we're so used to thinking about it this way, but it's actually value-based. And just to illustrate this, if you go to the gas station and you're looking at the price of gas, what would you say the price of gas is based on?
The price of the competitor who is most equivalent or closest geographically.
Sure. So the one that's closest to you. But it's really interesting because like one gas station might have a price that's 20 cents higher than the one down the road. And so a lot of people would also identify the price of oil, as driving the price of gasoline, and it certainly does to an extent. If you guys remember there was an attack on the refinery in Saudi Arabia a year or two ago. And, there was a big worry about oil production. And what did it do to gasoline prices overnight? They shot way up, right? And so, that feels like cost plus. But let me ask you this question. How long do you think it takes for oil to be pumped out of the ground in Saudi Arabia, loaded into tankers, sail across the ocean, get unloaded into trucks and go to the refinery, be turned into gasoline, and then go into trucks and get into your local station. How long do you think that process takes?
3 months.
At least.
3 months.
It's like 6 to 9 months for that whole thing. And so they're not basing the price of gasoline on the cost of oil, because what happens when the cost of oil crashes? I mean, it certainly goes down at the pump, but it's not the way it goes up. It slowly peters down over a period of time. And so they're actually doing value-based pricing. They're pricing the product based on what you're willing to pay and what you would expect to pay based on the stations around you. Pretty interesting. But you don't just see this in consumer stuff like, gasoline. You also see it in software, SaaS, consulting, and so on. You take something like Microsoft Office 365. I haven't priced this recently, but the last time I looked, a license for O365 costs something like, I don't know, $200, for a user. But let me ask you this question. What do you think is the incremental cost to Microsoft to drive a copy of O365 down onto your laptop? What do you think that
Zero.
costs?
Almost zero.
Zero.
I mean, it may not be
Yeah.
zero, but it's approaching zero. It's pretty close to zero. So they're certainly not pricing based on their cost to deliver it to you. They're pricing it based on the value that they've created for you. So that's value-based pricing as well. And you also see it with consultants like McKinsey or Bain or some of these high-end consultants. I'm sure you guys have seen how these consultants work, right? They go to your CEO and they say, we'd like to take a look at your business. And they spend, a week or two or 3 or 4 going through and analyzing your business. And then they come back and they say, we have identified $10 million of improvements that you can make in your business to, reduce costs or to increase revenues. And we will be happy to give you the full report about how to unlock those $10 million of revenue and savings. And that report will cost you only $3 million. Now, do you think the $3 million they're charging for that report has anything to do with their cost to create the report? Zero.
Not at all.
Zero. In fact, the dirty secret of those consultants is those reports are 80% written before they walk in the door. In fact, if they identified not 10 million, but 20 million of improvement, do you think they're going to charge the same 3 million to get at it? No way, right? They're going to charge 5 million. And so again, they're doing value-based pricing, not pricing based on cost. The bottom line as to why we don't use our cost when setting our price can kind of come back to this concept. The value that you create in your product, it doesn't depend on your costs. Value is not dependent on costs. So sometimes you create a lot of value with less costs. And sometimes your value is lower, even though your cost is higher. Now, some of you may have worked in something like microprocessors or semiconductors, and you see this all the time. So Intel, AMD, NVIDIA, companies like those, when they build their microprocessors, they build them on this tool that you see here called a wafer. One wafer could generate dozens or hundreds of processors in the end. But because of the intricacies in the silicon, the chemical composition, and so on, some processors come off of that wafer with higher performance than others. And so they go through this process they call binning, where they put them into bins based on their performance. Now, every processor that comes off that wafer has identical cost because it's one wafer. But they're able to charge more for some because they have higher performance than others, right? So they're pricing not based on their cost, but based on their value. That's why we don't price on cost. It's all based on the value that we've created, which is why we always start with value-based pricing. All right, so that's our first lesson today, is like when we want to differentiate pricing strategies, cost plus, competition, or value-based. Value-based is more profitable more often than almost every other pricing strategy. So that's why we always want to start there. And then you might nudge things in one direction or the other, but that's a really good starting point. Okay, so now that we understand a couple of different pricing strategies, let's get into value-based buying. And this is where I want to enter the mind of the buyer and think about, how does the buyer make decisions? Before we can price the product, we need to understand how the buyer thinks. And to do that, I want to start exploring this concept of value. Value is a really loaded term. In fact, if I go to each of you and I ask you to define value, I'd probably get a bunch of different answers. And so we like to put a little bit of structure around this term to kind of get everybody moving in the same direction. So when you break down value, value can actually have 3 kind of distinct meanings. The first one is called value in use. So value in use is the value you actually get from using something. So what's the value I get from riding on my Peloton? Or what's the value I get from, the coffee I drink in the morning, or the Zoom software that I'm using to connect with you today. The value you get from actually using something is called value in use, and it's very sort of practical. That's the value I achieve by using something. Value in choice is the value that you perceive when there are trade-off alternatives. So what's the value of Zoom over WebEx? What's the value of driving a Ford over a Ferrari? And so on. Value in choice is when you can make comparisons or trade-offs if there are alternatives to pick from. And then finally, there's deal value. Deal value is when, I'm sure at some point, have you ever picked up a product and looked at the price point and said, wow, that's a really good deal? That's deal value. It's when there's a gap in expectations between the value that product delivers to you and the price point that they're charging. Right? When there's a gap in expectations there, they're giving you a lower price point than you expected for the value they give you. That's called deal value. You put those three categories together to make up value and create what the market is willing to pay for your product. And if we had a little bit more time today, we'd talk about how to measure each of these things. There are different measurement techniques you could go to in all these, and I'm happy to chat with anybody offline when you start to think about measurement. But when we start to get into willingness to pay, and we're thinking about the mind of the buyer, I want you to consider a really interesting decision that your buyer is making. And as far as I know, Pragmatic is one of the few that teaches this concept. This is the idea that your buyer is making a specific type of decision when choosing to buy a product like yours. We call that a will I or a which one decision. And this is a really interesting concept because sometimes they're going to make just one of these decisions. Sometimes they might make both. So let's describe the difference between the two. A will I decision is a decision the buyer makes that says, do I want to purchase a product in this category at all? Right? Do I want a product like this at all? If the answer to that question is yes, they might go to a which one decision. So a which one decision is where they say, okay, I do want a product of this type in this category. Which one of many different choices am I going to choose from? And so you'll see here the example I have of the, going to the guitar store. Let's say that, 2020 has been rough, right? For all of us. And I decide, you know what? I'm going to celebrate entering 2021 by picking up a new skill. This is going to be the year I learn how to play the guitar. And let's say I pick up with a private lesson teacher here in Austin who's going to teach me how to play the guitar. And I go to that private lesson teacher and he says, this is the guitar that you want to go buy. This is the one that's best for a beginner. In that case, I'm just making a will I decision. I'm not making a trade-off comparison purchase. I'm not looking at things like brand or features. I'm just going with the recommendation of my private lesson teacher. That's a will I. Do I want to buy a new guitar? And the answer is yes, I'm going to buy this one. On the other hand, let's say you walk into the music store and you see a wall that looks like this, where there's 50 different guitars hanging up, and they all have different price points. They all have different brand names. They have different materials. They have different number of strings, and they obviously have different price points. Now I'm making a which one decision because I'm saying, okay, which one of these many options am I going to choose from? And I'm trading off between things like brand, price, size, material, and so on. All these different alternatives that are coming up. And the really interesting thing about understanding what type of decision your buyer is making, a will I or a which one, is that depending on when you capture them, you can actually charge them more for certain types of decisions than for others. So let's explore that in the context of will I first. And we'll do a little case study here. So I got the picture of her bungee jumping. So here's an illustration of sometimes people will only make a will I decision. Do I want a product like this at all? So let me ask you this. Has anybody here ever gone bungee jumping? Anybody on the call today ever? I'm surely we have one, right? We've got 50 some odd people. Anybody ever gone bungee jumping? Jerry's gone. Jay says no way. Okay. So Jerry, do you remember roughly what you paid when you went bungee jumping?
Sorry, I do not. It was at least 20 years ago.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I'll tell you that based on the experience I've had, going through this case study in the past, usually people would say bungee jumping costs, $150, maybe $200, something along those lines. So bungee jumping is oftentimes a will I decision, right? You go on vacation, you show up to, this scenic bridge and, oh my gosh, here's a provider. They're tied up with their rope and it's $150. Yeah, I've always wanted to do that. So you connect up and you pay your fee and you go bungee jumping. So that's a will I decision. You're not making trade-offs. You're not comparison shopping. It's a will I decision only. And so whether they were charging, $150 or $200 is not super relevant in a will I decision, because will I decisions are less price sensitive. And that's really interesting. If you're just making a will I decision and you can capture them in this phase, then you can actually charge more because they don't have trade-offs or comparisons to go up against, or they don't think about it as much. So you can actually make more money and a higher price on a will I decision than on a which one. Now, how many of you on this session would never go bungee jumping? I see some conversation happening in the chat. Jason, are you in that category? You'd never go bungee jumping? Yeah.
Oh, I'd definitely go. I just have to get sign off from the executive committee.
That's right. Yeah. The risk assessment committee. All right. So a lot of people would say, nope, never going to go, waiting for the kids to finish college. Yep. Okay. So let me give you a scenario. Those of you that identified you'd never go bungee jump, let me give you a scenario. Let's say that you, let's say that today, because it's Product Coffee, we have a Groupon for bungee jumping, that Jason's given away as one of his 12 days of Christmas. And normally bungee jumping would be $150, but today it's half price. It's only $75. I just offered you a 50% discount. Now, did I change your mind? Those of you that said no, are you now willing to go bungee jumping because I gave you a 50% discount? What do you think? Mark and Jessica say, nope, I don't think so. And here's the reason. You're making a will I decision. And even though I offered you a big discount, the answer is still no, right? Because in a will I decision, they're not very price sensitive. You've got to make a huge price move in a will I in order to affect behavior. On the other hand, if you let them get to a which one decision, then the price becomes a lot more sensitive. So if you get to a which one decision, picture, buying a new television. You walk into the electronics store and you go to the back of the store, and they have that big wall of televisions, and they're all differentiated basically on two things: size and price. And now I'm making a trade-off decision. I'm looking at the brand name, I'm looking at the size, I'm looking at the resolution, I'm looking at all those different things. And price now becomes a big factor. If one of those TVs is on a 30% discount, then I'm really going to consider it a lot more strongly than otherwise. So in a which one decision, price becomes a much bigger factor. And so the key lesson here is that will I, which one? If you can find will I decisions in your buyers, and you can solve and come to market with products that solve those will I problems, you can actually make more money. So we want to seek out those will I decisions. And that's where we can capture even more value. And here's the fun thing. Sometimes you can prevent them from going to the which one and capture them during the will I. The TV is a good example. So let's say you go to the back of the store, you evaluate all these different TVs and you look and say, I want that one. So you buy it, price is a consideration. Now you're walking to the front and you got this big TV on your cart, and you get to the front of the store and you're checking out. And the sales associate, who's very helpful, says, well, Denise, don't you want a HDMI cable to hook this up, once you get home? I mean, surely you bought this new 4K TV. You're going to want a nice cable to hook it up when you get home. I've got one right here. And you say, yeah, you know what? I do need a cable. And they just add it to your cart. And guess what? That cable is $60 for a 5-foot cable. You can buy that exact same cable on monoprice for $10. The what's it called? Performance plan, or the security plan is the same thing, right? Don't you want to protect your purchase, right? I'll sell you this 3-year plan to protect your purchase for only $30, right? That is a will I, right? You're not comparison shopping the cable or the insurance at that point. And you see this online as well. if you go to Dell.com and you buy or you put a laptop in your cart, they will offer you add-on products like printers and so on. They will actually charge you more for the same printer in the add-on phase after you've bought the laptop than if you bought it standalone, because they know if you're buying the printer standalone, you're making a which one. If you're buying it as an accessory to the laptop, it's a will I, and you're not as price sensitive in the will I decision. Pretty fascinating, right? And so the idea here is that will I products, if you can find them, like add-on products, are really powerful places to find your profit. And for those of you that are doing SaaS products like software as a service, here's an interesting idea. The SaaS product and platform itself, the buyer makes a will I and a which one. They're probably comparison shopping. But once they get onto your platform, any subsequent purchases for things like implementation services, reporting add-on packages, and so on, those are will I decisions only. Because once they're on your platform, their ability to comparison shop and cross shop for add-on products goes down immensely. And so I see a lot of times SaaS products, they discount the add-on products because like, I don't want to rip off my existing customers. That's the opposite of what we should do. We should, use those opportunities to make more profit because they can't comparison shop in those things. Pretty interesting idea. All right, so let's play the will I which one game and see if we can figure out across this table if it's a will I or a which one decision. And this one always generates some interesting discussion. So if I'm buying soda at a McDonald's, imagine you're at the drive-through. Do you think that's a will I or a which one decision?
Which one?
Ooh, some disagreement. In the chat, there's a bunch of will I's. This one I think is more, so look, before I go down this path, we can invent scenarios for almost all these where it could be either. So I'm just going to be talking in generalities here. This one I think of more as a will I, because when I'm at the drive-thru at McDonald's, I'm not thinking, am I going to get a Coke here or am I going to go across the street to Wendy's and get something? It's more of a, am I going to buy soda at McDonald's or not? So I think of that more as a will I. What about buying a new pair of shoes? You think that's a will I or which one?
Which one?
A bunch of people in the chat say which one. I would think that's a which one. So, I mean, unless you're one of those people that only has one pair of shoes and when it wears out, you buy another pair. For most people, it's a which one. Which one of many different options do I want to choose from? Do I want this new pair of Louboutins? Do I want this other thing? So I'm gonna choose and make comparison shopping there. What about buying a new Windows computer like a Dell? You think that's a will I or which one? This one's kind of interesting. This is a which one. So usually if you're buying a PC, you're open to other brands, you're open to other models. You're going to comparison shop and you're going to look at, Dell versus HP versus Acer versus Lenovo. You're going to think about, do I want a screen size of this or that? And so there's a lot of which one choices that go into this. Price is a big factor there. And so you see a lot of heavy price competition versus if you're buying a new Apple computer, do you think that's more of a will I or which one? Yeah, will I. So if you're an Apple fanboy, of which I am one, the question is not, am I going to buy an Apple or am I going to buy a PC? I'm buying an Apple, right? The question is, does Apple have a new model for me? But it's not a which one decision. It's like you're going to buy an Apple. It's just a question of, what's the new model? Gasoline for your car, that's more of a which one. I mean, it could be a will I, but it's usually a which one. Because on this one, which station am I going to go to? Could anybody invent a scenario where gasoline for your car would be a will I? John, I like what you said. It's a which one until the light's on. All right, then it's a will I.
Gas versus electric. Is gas versus electric going to be a will I? Or which one?
So yeah, gas versus electric. So like if I'm buying a new car and I'm deciding, I'm probably going to say, the first question I'm going to ask is, okay, do I want a new car at all? That's a will I. And if the answer is yes, then I'm going to go to a which one, and I'm going to start making trade-off decisions. Do I want gasoline or electric? Well, let's look at the value that I perceive for both. and so on. So that's going to be more of a which one, and price is going to be a consideration. I might say, ooh, the Tesla is, $60,000, and I could get a gas car for much less than that, but then I got to fill it up and I got to do the ROI calculation and so on. So you're comparing that. Remember the value in use concept we talked about? That's what you start comparing, and also value in choice.
Paul, for a while, gasoline was a how much question for me. Like, right, starving student, right, ramen startup type budget. How does that map? Is that more of a will I?
Yeah, it's more of a will I. If you have to go buy it, it's going to be more of a will I. So things that are not optional purchases, it's like it's will I, and the answer is yes. So anything where you're a captive audience. So you think like, popcorn at the movie theater, right? That's a will I. And it's also how much. If the answer is yes, and the answer is okay, how much do I have to take a second mortgage for my house, right? If you're going to buy popcorn at the theater. One other scenario where gasoline would be a will I, like let's say you're driving from, California to Texas, and you go through Death Valley on the way. And as you're about to enter Death Valley, you see this sign that says last gasoline for 150 miles. That's a will I, because it's like, ooh, am I going to chance it? Can I make it? Or do I want to just like sit here and top off? All right, you're going to sit there and top off, regardless of how much that costs, because you're not going to risk getting stranded out there. Ink for your printer. That's an interesting one. What do y'all think? Is that a will I or which one? Ooh, there's some disagreement here. All right, so for those of you that said will I, why do you say will I for this one?
Because the printer ink is typically tied to the printer vendor. I can't put Epson ink in a Canon printer, so.
So you just hit the button to rebuy from the vendor.
Yeah.
So the decision is like, do I want to rebuy ink for this printer, or do I want to just throw away the printer and get a whole new one? That's kind of the decision.
How about no printer?
All right.
I went to no printer because I had an 85-year-old neighbor that was always near a printer. I'm surrounded by software engineers, and I'm close to like FedEx and Staples, and it was less trouble to go up there once a week to get printouts than it is to just find another place to plug it into and handle all of the maintenance issues.
All right. So for Joyce, for your situation, you made a will I decision, and the answer was no. I don't want to refill the ink of my printer because I'm going to go to this alternative solution.
Paper jams.
Yeah.
And it's been working for 4 years.
Paper cuts. No fun.
No,
All
I would
right.
love to eliminate the problem of updating drivers. They seem to disappear once in a while, and then you're stuck.
They do. They do. That's called planned obsolescence. What about which one? Could anybody invent a scenario where ink is a which one? Got some examples in the chat.
People who are immune to you have to pair the chemistry of the paper with the chemistry of the ink and the chemistry of the printer.
Exactly.
Right. It's a different group of customers, the people who are willing to get in the weeds versus just make it work.
Sure. There's certainly a breed of customer who says, you know what, I'm not going to accept that I'm tied to that one vendor of ink, and I'm going to go and I'm going to find the little needle to inject ink back into the cartridge and fill it back up and so on. I mean, it's certainly possible to do that if you're willing to take the effort. And for those people, it's more of a which one, because you're comparison shopping at that point.
I think sometimes pricing actually does make printer, in this example, a which one, because it's often cheaper to go to Office Depot and buy a new printer than it is to buy the replacement printer cartridges.
Yeah, and that's really fascinating how much printers have become like a disposable commodity nowadays because of that.
It almost becomes a which one in that light.
Yeah. So what's interesting about which one is it always comes after will I. So, do I want to buy ink for my printer or not? And the answer is no, because I hate being tied to this one printer and ink is so expensive. Okay, what am I going to do about that? Well, I guess I'll buy a new printer. All right, now which one of many printers do I want to buy? And I'll go to the store and choose from a whole bunch of different options. So that would become a which one at that point.
Hey, Paul, if you shift it with like a jobs to be done mindset and say, well, actually, I don't want a printer, I want printouts, and allow printing services to compete with printers. Like, does that fundamentally shift the pricing stuff, or does this apply in that context too?
I think it would still apply, although I need to think about it a little bit more. You know, if I think about like what I want is ink on a piece of paper, not a printer. You know, do I want, I guess the question now would become, do I want a printout of this thing at all? That's my will I. And if the answer is yes, I could solve that problem, or I could hire a product to do that job in a variety of ways, whether it's through a service or a printer that I buy myself. And well, actually, here's an example of that captive audience, Scott. Let's say a couple of years ago, we were in the midst of closing on a house, and we went on a cruise in the middle of that. And they sent me some stuff that I had to print and get notarized. So I didn't have access to my own printer on the cruise ship. And so I had to use the printing service, and it was a will I decision only, because it's like, do I want to print this out and get it signed and notarized on the cruise ship in the middle of the ocean or not? Or do I want to wait and risk losing that house? So I was a will I. I had no ability to make a which one. So the fact that they charged me $5 a page to print that out, you know, I want to say happily paid, but I did pay. All right, beer in the stadium. What do y'all think about that one? This one's really interesting. It's a will I. The reason it's a will I is that in most stadiums, there's only one provider of beer. They might have different brands, but they don't care if you buy one brand or another. It's all coming from the same provider. You don't usually have the ability within a stadium to say, am I going to go to this provider or that provider? You only have one. And so it's a will I, right? Am I going to buy this beer at all? And then what about a tattoo? Do you think that's a will I or a which one?
That's a big will I.
Ooh. This one's pretty fascinating, right? So I think I could invent a scenario where it would be either. So here's a scenario. Let's say that Jason is on a bachelor party with his friend in New Orleans. You know, he and John are in New Orleans. And they drink their yard of margarita. and then John says, Jason, I want to commemorate this moment by getting a tattoo. And he pulls him into the tattoo parlor. Now, at that particular moment, do you think that's a will I or which one decision? That's totally a will I, right? Right? Do I want to get this tattoo at all? Or let's compare that to, let's say that Jason has some sort of memorable life event, like, you know, like the birth of a child or something like that. And he says, I want to commemorate this by getting a tattoo. And so he's going to look all across Atlanta. He's going to look at all these different artists. He's going to compare their work. He's going to, you know, look at their sketches and so on. That's a which one, because now he's comparison shopping. Price is a consideration, but there's all these other considerations as well. So I think it could be either, depending on, you know, the particulars of the scenario. So I'm not going to do this one. So the rule here that I want you to think about is that when it comes to prices, it takes a small price change to sway a which one decision, but a really big change to sway a will I decision. And so if you're looking for less price sensitivity in your buyers, then will I type products are what you're going to go for. All right, so let's pivot now and talk about differentiation, because I know that, you know, many of you have concerns about that, and we wanted to talk about that a little. And I want to just use a really simple example here to illustrate differentiation and how to think about it. So let's go to the grocery store. And talk about beans, specifically green beans. So I have here two different options. I've got my Del Monte brand name green beans for $1.69. And I've got my generic store brand version of the same for $1.49. So how many of you would choose the brand name on the left-hand side? Yeah, a couple of you. Versus how many of you would choose the store brand? Okay. So those of you that chose the Del Monte brand, the brand name, why did you choose that one? What was driving that decision in your head? Scott said he would try both. All right, so Denise says, I know the Del Monte always tastes good, the brand, the quality, the perceived value, no salt. They actually both have no salt added. It's just hard to see it on this one. It's down here. All right, so you trust in quality for the one on the left-hand side. And for those of you on the right-hand side that chose the store brand, why did you choose that one? What was driving that decision? The price, says Jessica. Save a few cents, price. Okay. So I don't really care which one you choose because it's really about your perception of value. So here's the really interesting thing about differentiation. It's based on your perceptions, and perceptions are reality. For most people, if they would choose the one on the left, it's about the perception that the Del Monte beans have higher quality, the more trust in the brand name, and so on. Versus for people who choose the one on the right, it's more about I have the perception that it's going to have, you know, a lower price. And it's not just perception, it's also reality in this case. Now, when you are pricing your product, you have to understand what is the market's perception and of your product versus your competition, and where do you fit in the market in the mind of your buyer. Win-loss analysis is one really good way to do that research and understand how they comparison shop and how they perceive you.
Hey, Brad.
Now, in the real world ideal state,
What's up?
then it would be best to have real differentiated value, right? Where I can point to my product and say, it's better than the competition. Here are 5 provable reasons why. You know, I can prove it. I've got an analyst report. I've got references. I've got all this stuff. That's the ideal. That's the perfect world. But here's the fun thing idea. If you don't have real differentiation, perceived differentiation is almost as good. So differentiation is real if the buyer thinks it's real. And so if you don't have real differentiation, you have to create it. You have to create perceived differentiation. And, you know, just to kind of stay at the grocery store for a second, you're going to see this all over the place at the grocery store. For example, here in Austin, we have this grocery store called H-E-B. And I went there the other day to pick up some coffee because we were out. And the normal brand that I would get was sold out. And so I started looking at all the different stuff on the shelf. And there was this one coffee container that had a big label slapped on the side that said mountain grown coffee. And I'm like, wow, that sounds good. I want mountain grown coffee. And I'm going to buy that one. But then I said, wait a second. All coffee is grown in the mountains. Like it literally won't grow unless it's in the mountains. But they were the only ones to talk about that on the side of their packaging. And so they were creating that perceived differentiation because they were the only ones emphasizing that point. You see it in the butcher section, you know, there you'll see the label on the side of like some of the packages that say like antibiotic free pork or chicken. Well, here's the deal. That's a federal regulation in the US. You cannot sell pork that has antibiotics added. And so real differentiation is great if you have it. Perceived differentiation is almost as good. And so the lesson here is that if you don't have real differentiation, you have to create perceived differentiation in the mind of your buyer to drive that value. Perception is reality when it comes to that differentiation. And you have to understand what is the mind of the buyer by doing your research on them to understand what do they perceive in terms of differentiation. Pretty interesting, right? It doesn't have to be real. It just has to be real in the mind of the buyer. All right, I want to spend a few minutes here at the end talking about price segmentation and how to think about segmenting the price of your product and charging different prices for the same product to different parts of the market. That's pretty interesting because different parts of the market might have different willingnesses to pay for your product. And we'll do a little case study to wrap this up so that we can start applying some of these lessons. So here's the question I have for you. Here's 3 different examples. Let's say I gave everybody a $300 voucher. So I gave you a $300 voucher and you've got 3 things you can use to buy it with or to spend your $300 on. You could get a nice dinner out, you know, with a significant other or somebody special to you. You could get this nice new designer handbag, or you could get that Garmin dashboard camera. And so the question is, which of these 3 things are you going to choose? I don't know. Which one would you choose and why? Yeah. Ryan would go for the meal. That'd be a lot. That's what I would go for personally. I would love to go out with my, you know, wife and actually have a nice dinner. It's been a while since we've done that. Some of you would get the camera. Some of you would get the designer bag and so on. Here's the deal. I don't care what you chose because we all put different perceived value on these 3 things. And so willingness to pay for each of these is different for each of us. And so what we have to think about here is when we're setting a price for our product, what I want to do, the ideal state, is I want to be able to charge less to buyers who are willing to pay less and more to buyers who are willing to pay more. At least that's the idea. But that runs up against a really sort of fundamental concept that most people sort of get, makes their skin crawl a little bit. And that's the question, is this idea that you're seeing here, charging less to buyers willing to pay less and more to buyers willing to pay more, is that fair? Is it fair to charge less to those willing to pay less and more to those willing to pay more? That's a little bit of a tricky decision. So let me go back to Menti for a moment, and I got to clear out my old poll here. And I'm going to pull this up, and we're going to have a chance to all weigh in on this. So charging less to those willing to pay less and more to those willing to pay more, is that fair? Hopefully I can get this to, all right, here we go. I'm going to pull this over. So what do you think? Yes, it's fair. No, it's not fair, or I'm not sure. Oh, let me put the code back in there for everybody. You might still have it up, but if you don't, there you go. All right, we've got a lot of hardcore capitalists on this call, right? A bunch of people saying, yeah, it's fair.
Well, product managers, it's part of the job,
right? It may be fair, but there's certainly places where it feels unfair. Okay, well, it looks like it looks like most of you would say it's fair. Oh, one person says it's not fair. Okay, good. So I was hoping to get at least one response.
I think there's a definite distinction that I wrestle with in my mind. One is it fair? Yes, absolutely, it's fair. Is it within my values to do so? Is it within my corporate values, my company values, my core values to do so? Is an entirely different question.
Right.
Yeah, and for fun, I'll chime in with Jason. Is it fair to charge different prices for insulin?
I was going to go down that exact same path, Scott. In fact, I have my little vial here of Fiasp, right? That I pay, I don't know, $600 a vial for because I have type 1 diabetes. But if I were to go to Canada, $100 or less, maybe $50 a vial. If I were to go to Mexico, maybe even less. Same vial.
Yeah, $10 in Ukraine.
Doesn't feel very fair. You got to go pick some up for me next time you're over there, Scott. That'd be amazing. All right, so here's the bottom line and how I think about fairness. It's fair if the market thinks it's fair. And so one of the things we're going to look at in this section to kind of wrap up today is how to create the perception of fairness within the mind of your buyer so that you can charge different prices successfully without them feeling like it's unfair. And to do that, we're going to look at 3 different ways. We'll actually look at 4, but 3 different ways here to segment and charge different prices for the same product to different buyers. So we're going to segment price by customer characteristics, who they are, by transactional information, and by behavioral information. And we'll go through some examples in both B2B and B2C for all 3 of these. So let's start first with customer characteristics. This is about who they are. And I want to go first to the movie theater. So you can see here, movie theater pricing. I've got 3 different prices here. I charge $11 to adults, $10 to seniors, $8 to children. This is segmenting the price of the product based on who they are, based on their customer characteristics. And you see this all the time. I might charge a different price based on who they are, based on if they're a student. You see it in theme parks. I'm going to charge a different price for local business versus non-residents, might pay higher. And so that's based on who they are. You also see this in B2B as well. You see in B2B charging different prices for the same product based on who it's being sold into. Microprocessors are a good example of this in semiconductor. Intel has the exact same chip, the exact same technology that is sold into devices integrated into things like MRI machines versus the same microprocessor technology is sold into toys. You better believe they charge a much higher price for the one that goes into the MRI machine than for the one that goes into the toy. And the reason they're able to get away with that is they create a lot more value up here at the top than they do at the bottom. Now, they also wrap a different level of service and support and so on around the one that goes up here at the top. It's a different SKU officially, but it's the same basic technology. It's very different price. In B2B, you also see this in like regional pricing. I might charge a different price for China versus for Latin America. You might see it. I'm going to charge a different price for not-for-profit companies versus for-profit companies, or government versus, enterprise buyers. And so these are all ways of segmenting based on who they are, right? Customer characteristics. The second way to do it, and Scott, we're going to go through all three of these so you can catch them again, is transactional information. So this is information you capture at the time of the transaction, and you can actually use that transactionally captured information to drive different pricing. And so back at the movie theater, I have morning cinemas, $6 if you go in the morning. If you go during normal times, it's $11. If you go to a matinee, it's $9. And so we're capturing this information at transaction time. What time are they trying to go to the movies? And you can see here what they're trying to incentivize are moving business into their low times so that, more people will actually go during times when they wouldn't otherwise go based on pricing. So that's things that we capture transactionally.
Hey, Paul, I've always thought of that particular one as customer characteristics, that you have price sensitive, time insensitive people who won't go to an evening movie, who will go to a matinee.
So it certainly might line up with the persona. You might have a more price sensitive person who shows up in the morning. But it's also the thing that's driving the pricing model in this case is the transactional information. I could have somebody who is, a rich person who still comes to the morning cinema in this case, and I'm going to charge them a lower price, even though they're rich, because they're going to the morning cinema. So it's transactionally driven pricing rather than persona driven, which is over here on the right. At least that's how I think about it. Most of the time, it's not just going to be just one of these. It's going to be a combination or mix of all three.
Awesome, thank you.
A pretty cool example of this as well is the San Francisco Giants baseball team. They play out there in the Bay Area. And if you've ever been out to the Bay Area, it's pretty, gross, foggy, and so on. They have dynamic pricing. So they charge a different price to go see the baseball team play on days when it's like sunny and beautiful outside, which are rare, versus on days when it's foggy and gross. And you better believe you pay a higher price if it's beautiful weather outside. Again, transactionally obtained information. You see this in B2B as well. Typically in how much volume are you willing to transact for? If you're willing to transact for more volume, you get a lower price. If you're willing to take on more lead time, then you might pay a lower price. If you're willing to be a reference, then you might be, get a lower price. So you usually see this in B2B too. This one's from AWS. And then the final way is behavioral. So behavioral information is basically what hoops is the buyer willing to jump through in order to obtain a lower price. Used to be this was about clipping out a coupon. Nowadays, it's about searching the coupon code. So have you ever bought something online and you're like, well, surely there must be a coupon code. And you start doing some searching on Google, and then you search for 5 or 10 minutes. You don't find anything on Retail Me Not or one of those other sites. You just give up. You're like, whatever. It's only, $30. Well, there are people who will search and search and search and search for an hour until they find the coupon code that will save them $5. Those people are more price sensitive than those who aren't willing to dedicate the hour. And so that's a behavioral characteristic. People who are more price sensitive will jump through more hoops. Think of loyalty programs and so on. That's a B2C behavioral characteristic. But you also see this in B2B. So here's a kind of a fun example from Amazon. If you buy something for your business on Amazon, 2-day shipping, $7.98. But look up here, free 2-day shipping. Now they know that most people, if you're spending somebody else's money, are going to be less oriented to, save a buck. And so, they are using the behavioral characteristic of, are you actually willing to change your radio button? And they know that a lot of people aren't. So they're actually making a little bit of margin on that. It wouldn't surprise me. All right, so I don't want to go through this because I think you get the idea. I want you to practice it, but let's talk about fairness. If we don't do pricing correctly, we're going to trigger the fairness thing where people are like, oh, that's not fair. So look at this title. Those of you in Atlanta may appreciate this. Variable price Coke machine being tested. So now read the first line of the first paragraph. Taking full advantage of the law of supply and demand, the Coke company is quietly testing a vending machine that can automatically raise prices for drinks in hot weather. How do you feel when you read that? Does that feel fair to you when you read that? Or does that feel unfair? Exploited? Cheated? Yeah, okay. So they have triggered that reaction of, ooh, that's not fair. What if I were to change it? I'm gonna just reword this. You tell me how you feel now. What if I were to say, taking full advantage of the laws of supply and demand, Coke has begun testing a vending machine that will automatically discount prices for its drinks when it's cold outside. Now, all of a sudden that feels a little bit more fair, right? Right? Because we've discounted rather than raising prices. So if you want to create the perception of fairness in price segmentation, then here are the rules. You discount to the qualified group, you don't surcharge, right? You always move down then up. So you start high and move down to the qualified group. The rules are known and they don't change. Think of the airlines. Think of how much their pricing has changed and what used to be included in the ticket no longer is. That's an example of the rules changing and shifting, and people, it triggers that perception of, ooh, that's not fair. So here's what I want to do. I want to give you a little challenge to go through and think about how to segment by price. And we're going to spend I'm going to give you about 6 minutes on this activity. We're going to put you into, actually, Jason, can we use the breakout rooms feature of Zoom? Do we have the ability to do that?
Absolutely. Yes, we do.
All right, perfect. Is that something I have to set up? I'm going to do that.
No,
now.
I can do it. Just tell me when you're ready to go.
Okay, so put them in groups of about 5.
Okay.
It can be randomly distributed. Your job is to pick a product. So I would encourage you to pick something like Netflix or Uber or AWS. Don't worry about the product. Just pick a well-known product. And I want you to come up with 3 to 6 new ways to segment it based on what we just talked about. So 2 new ways of segmenting based on customer characteristics, 2 new ways of segmenting by transactional, and 2 new ways of segmenting by behavioral. And then we'll come back and spend the last minute or 2 wrapping up and seeing if you come up with something interesting. All right. So pick Netflix, Uber, hotel, AWS, whatever, and come up with 2 new ways to segment based on each of those that we just talked about. All right. We'll give you that. Yeah, that time goes really quick. I'd hope to give you like a full 10 or 12 minutes on that, but there was just a lot of discussion elsewhere. But let me ask you this. Was anybody able to come up with any new ways to segment based on those things? Or do you spend the whole time on what product you were using?
Yes, Paul, this is Damo here. We were Denzi and myself and there's one more person who were talking about behavioral segmentation. We're talking about movies, for example, with Netflix of children's movies versus the mid-range people and the elderly. So watching classic movies. So trying to do a package on that. So that is behavioral. So before that, we ever dropped into this room. So we couldn't probably get the other ones. So hopefully that's something.
Yeah, that would be behavioral. Like what kind of movie what kind of content do I want to consume? Preston mentioned, student plans. So maybe I charge different for a student versus somebody who's, working. That might be a customer characteristic. There might be some other things I might look at. Any other ideas?
People.
Yeah, like on the transactional side, we also talked about Netflix, but we were talking about, are they coming in just over the holidays? Is that when they're coming in to do it, or is this somebody who comes in in the middle of the night? Who's looking to watch something? So.
Sure. Yeah, and maybe I want to incentivize people to move to the middle of the night to save bandwidth or cost or whatever. That'd be interesting. Okay, so you get the idea that there's not one right answer here. There's lots of right answers, and that's the fun thing about pricing. So hopefully that gives you some ideas about how to apply some of these lessons to your own products. If you want to learn more about this, if you go to the Pragmatic Institute website, we have a lot of content on pricing, and I'm always happy to connect with anybody offline. If you want to reach out to me, I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and always happy to chat. There it is, pyoung@pragmaticinstitute.com. So if you want to connect with me online or on LinkedIn or reach out with questions, always happy to chat.
Yep, I've got a link to the correct Paul Young's profile right there on the resources page as well. So you can find him and stalk him online to your heart's content.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
Thank you, Paul. Thanks everyone for joining. Don't forget to sign up for the book giveaway, and registration for next week's kind of open mic knowledge bombs is already up on the Product Coffee Eventbrite site, and you'll get your email later today for those of you who are on the Product Coffee mailing list. We will see you next time. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Everybody. Bye.
Yep.